Today I shared 2 ideas for a silhouette stamp. Hi, it's Therese from Lostinpaper, and I've got this silhouette stamp called Wildflowers from Simon Says. There's 2 stamps in the set. It's a really large stamp, so I'm using my Misty. But because it's such a large stamp, what I've done is actually kept it away from the edge of the Misty. And then when I pick it up, I just make sure that there's no air bubbles behind the actual stamp. The good thing with the Misty is that you can keep stamping, and I did have to actually stamp this stamp a few times to get a good impression. But in the Misty, generally speaking, it doesn't matter as long as you try and keep your paper in the same place. And I do that by just pushing the paper into the corner each time before I stamp it. You'll just see there that I did prep my stamp with an eraser, and I do press quite hard on this eraser, and if you're finding that it's leaving little bits behind, maybe try a different one. This is only a cheap white plastic eraser. Right, so I've got a piece of cardstock here. It's 110 pound Nina, and it's larger than what I need because I can cut this down, and I plan to cut this down into some panels. And I want to create, with my first card, an ombre effect. So I've got 4 matching inks from Altenew, and this is I think it's called the Tropical Colours or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, I'm starting with the lightest, which is the Bamboo, probably my favourite of all their greens. And I've stamped that up only on the top portion of the stamp, and then I'm working my way down the stamp using the darker colours as I go. So the second colour is called Parrot, and I'm not going to the very top of the stamp here, I'm just filling the middle. Now I am using my mini ink cubes because it's just easier to do it in sections, but generally speaking I mostly just have the large ink pads and use those, and when I use those I just tip them on their edge a little bit so that they aren't covering the whole area. I can more add the ink where I want it to on the actual stamp itself. And you may notice that every now and again I'm coming in with some paper towel. You can use a wet cloth or a baby wipe just to get rid of some of those sharp edges. But another way to get rid of the sharp edges when you're trying to mix your inks like this is to actually re-stamp over the top with a lighter colour, and I'll do that a little bit later on. When it came to the darkest colour here, I didn't bother stamping it in layers. I actually did the moss and the olive green at the same time. Because I actually added the darker ink last, I wasn't really worried about contamination of the previous colour on my ink pad. But you can certainly do as I was doing before and wiping the stamp clean before adding, or stamping off before adding the colour. And that's a great thing about the Misty when you're wanting to do like a rainbow effect or an ombre effect. You don't have to contaminate your ink pads because you can actually just keep stamping in layers until you're happy, and I did do that here. I used my bigger ink pad, the Bamboo, just to cover the whole stamp and restamp the whole lot again, because that will seep into the paper and help mix the colour a bit better. And I added some highlights with the moss on the top of some of the flowers just by tipping the stamp on its edge. So now I'm cutting this panel into 3 separate panels, and as I'm cutting it away I am actually cutting an extra sliver in between, just a couple of millimeters, and each of these is 3 centimeters wide. Each of my panels that I'm going to keep and use are 3 centimeters wide. So this just means that when I line them up on my card front, they look like a actual continuous picture, not like I've just cut it up and pushed them off to the side and then they wouldn't flow. I also added some iridescent ink spray from Altenew and waited for that to dry before I popped each of the panels up on some foam and added them to the front of a top fold card. And I used some of the 1/4 inch Be Creative tape because I know that's going to hold really well. I thought this would make a really pretty sympathy card, so I stamped a sentiment from the Altenew Thinking of You stamp set with the moss green ink and just popped that up at the base of the card. It's a very clean and simple card. This one came together really quickly. Probably the thing that took the longest was waiting for the ink spray to dry. That's what I really like about the silhouette images, is they are very easy to make. It is very easy to make a quick card. Anyway, we're on to this card now. Things didn't go so well here for me because I'd already cut my panel down to go on the front of my card, and I wanted it to be stamped. I wanted my silhouette to be stamped in the center, so I decided to actually use my stamp masking paper to adhere it to the grid paper, and I was struggling to keep it lined up because I didn't take the time to make sure that it wasn't going to shift every time I stamped it out. But anyway, I'll show you what I did to fix it in a little minute. This time I decided to use different colors, and this is where it is important to clean your stamp in between your colors so that you don't contaminate the ink pads. I've just chosen a few of the different Altenew inks. They're really pretty together, starting with the Sunray, which is one of those really pretty oranges. I went to Pink Pearl, then I grabbed the Peach Perfect. I wasn't so happy with how that one looked, and I thought I needed to add something a little bit bolder. So in the end I actually did come in with the Coral Bliss. I was having a little bit of trouble getting pressure. I did have to stamp this a few times just to get the image right, and normally that wouldn't be a problem in the Misty, but because I hadn't adhered my paper down, I probably should have just used magnets in retrospect. Anyway, but the paper shifted when I was stamping, and I got an image that was a little bit off, so it had that almost like that shadowy look, which isn't too bad, I suppose, but it wasn't the look I was going for. So what I decided to do was actually blend the whole panel, and I've used my blending brushes, did some sea glass all over pretty much the whole image, and then came in with the darker blue, which was the ocean waves, just at the base of the image. And this isn't Zentangle. I haven't never done any Zentangle, although I do like to doodle. I thought I've seen some really awesome, you know, those Altenew stencils where they're a flower and then people stencil the colours in and then just draw roughly, like doodle over the top for the images. I think that looks amazing. I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose. I wasn't very happy with the way that this stamped out, so I grabbed my 0.3 Copic multi-liner and basically doodled all over the images. I didn't want to overdo it. I'm not sure if I actually did overdo it, but I thought it needed it where the stamping was off, so I had to sort of keep it the same amount all over. It looked funny if I had a lot more doodles at the bottom and none at the top, but I think it saved it in the end. I probably would take more time next time if I ever remade this card, which you know I won't, because I don't like to make the same card twice, but if I ever did, then I would be more careful. I've added a sentiment here. I'm just using my Misty because this is basically a one layer card. What I did was add the panel to the front of a top fold card, and I'm using my Obsidian Altenew pigment ink, which I'm obsessing over at the moment, and this is a really fine sentiment from a set called Flower Vine, and I just love these really tiny sentiments, but they can be a little bit difficult to stamp, and this ink stamped beautifully. As always, you guys, I appreciate your visits here, and I hope I've inspired you to get out your silhouette stamps. So like this video if you like it, and if you haven't already, I would love it if you subscribe to my channel, and I will see you here again real soon. Till then, happy paper crafting. Bye.